"Marry me, and I'll protect your brother," said the mafioso, and the orphan girl had no choice. Unaware, he ruled the city's underworld. Before the story begins, offer this channel a small kindness, a like and a subscribe. It makes all the difference. And if you wish, tell me where you're listening from. I'm endlessly curious to know where these words find you. I was used to breaking, but not like this. Not like the smell of hospital bleach clinging to my skin, or the sound of machines whispering promises they couldn't keep. Not like my brother's face, swollen and bloodied, looking years older in that sterile bed, still and silent, as if the world had already decided he wasn't needed in it anymore. Davi. I had screamed his name when I found him behind the bar, half conscious, blood pooling in the alley where we used to play as children. I had held his head in my lap and whispered lullabies through my sobs, because it was the only thing I remembered our mother singing before the fire took her voice from us. I thought I'd lost him then. I didn't know I was about to lose myself. He entered the hospital like a shadow. Black suit, black eyes, black silence. I didn't hear him. I felt him, like a shift in the air pressure, like the world bracing for a storm. He stood just outside the doorway, his hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on me as if I were the one on life support. Helena. He said my name like he owned it, like he'd been waiting years to speak it aloud. His voice wasn't cold. That would have been easier. It was warm, low, dangerous. I stood up too quickly, dizzy from fear and exhaustion. "Who are you?" He didn't blink. "The only man who can keep your brother alive." That was the first time I saw the monster. Not in his face. It was too calm, too sculpted, but in his certainty, in the way he never raised his voice, never made a show of power. He didn't need to. "I've arranged for his protection. No one will touch him again," he said. My stomach twisted. Why? He stepped closer, the door hissing shut behind him. I should have backed away. I didn't. I couldn't. His presence pulled everything in. "Because I want you." I stared at him, and something inside me turned to glass. I didn't speak, didn't breathe. I couldn't understand what kind of man said something like that while a boy lay dying beside him. "You'll marry me," he said simply. "And in return, your brother lives, free, untouched, forever." It wasn't a question. It wasn't even a threat. It was a truth, delivered like a contract sealed in blood. My knees weakened, not from the idea of marriage, or even fear, but from the weight of it. The way he looked at me, as if I were already his. As if the world had shifted under my feet and placed me directly into his orbit. I whispered, "Why me?" He tilted his head slightly. "Because you don't run." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. I had spent my entire life running, from grief, from hunger, from men who looked at me like a thing. But this man wasn't looking at me like I was fragile or beautiful. He looked at me like I was useful, like I mattered. That terrified me more than anything. He walked to the side of the bed and placed something on the table. A folder, thick with papers. A name change, a new home, and security beyond anything you've ever imagined. He looked at me again. "Say yes, Helena," and he wakes up in a world where no one can hurt him again. I stared at Davy. My heart was already making the decision my pride never would. I didn't have choices, only illusions, and this illusion wore a suit and smelled like danger wrapped in expensive cologne. "What kind of man makes this offer?" I whispered. He smiled, just a flicker. More pain than pleasure in it. The kind you'll learn to hate before you ever understand him. I didn't sign that night. Not with a pen. I signed with my silence, my stillness, my breath. I nodded, and in that moment, everything broke. Not just the girl I had been, but the life I thought I could still build with my own two hands. He walked out as silently as he had come, and I stood in the flickering hospital light, no longer free. But my brother lived, and the man who saved him had just claimed me. The dress wasn't white. It was black, satin, sleeveless, silent, like mourning dressed as elegance, like me. No guests, no flowers, no music, just a room in a government building with cold marble floors, and a man I barely knew standing beside me, his hand steady at my lower back, guiding me toward the end of something I hadn't even begun. I didn't ask questions. I didn't want the answers. I didn't need to know where the ring came from or how he made the judge appear on a Sunday. I didn't need to understand why the pen trembled in my hand when I signed the marriage certificate, or why his didn't. His name on paper looked harder than it sounded. Matteo Santoro. Clean, clinical, final. He didn't touch me when we left, didn't say a word in the car. He only looked straight ahead, jaw tense, hands resting on the wheel like he was holding something back, something lethal. I pressed my fingers together in my lap, The ring was heavier than it should have been. Platinum, custom fit. It burned like a shackle. I felt it pulsing against my skin like it had a heartbeat of its own. His heartbeat. His control. Outside the window, the city passed like a dream I no longer belonged to. The streets I used to walk with Davy. The corners we used to wait on for buses and hope. Now they looked like stories from someone else's life. We drove for over an hour before the skyline disappeared behind us. Then trees, then gates, then silence, and then his world. The mansion was carved into the cliffs, overlooking the sea like a predator watching its prey sleep. It was beautiful, yes, but the kind of beautiful that had teeth. Stark, brutal, impossible to soften. He opened the car door for me. I hesitated, and he waited. Not impatiently, not cruelly, just waited. Like he already knew the moment would come when I'd step into his world and there'd be no way back. I walked past him and into a cathedral of marble and shadow. The entrance hall was cavernous, with high ceilings and quiet footsteps echoing from staff that moved like ghosts. No one looked me in the eye. "This is home now," he said behind me. His voice was even, but low, like he hated the word as much as I did. I turned. "I didn't bring anything." He raised an eyebrow. "You won't need anything from before." Just like that. My life, erased. My past, buried. I was a new woman now, by name only. I didn't even know what they had changed it to. He gestured to the staircase. "Your room is on the second floor. End of the hall." "Not yours?" I asked. His eyes didn't flinch. "Not yet." I swallowed hard. There was no threat in his voice, but the word still felt like a promise wrapped in steel. He left me there, standing in the hall like an expensive painting no one quite knew where to hang. I climbed the stairs slowly, my heels echoing like a countdown. The room at the end of the hall wasn't just a bedroom. It was a palace in miniature. Velvet curtains, hand-carved furniture, a view of the ocean that could break your heart if you stared long enough. And on the bed, a box. Inside it, a phone, a credit card, and a letter in his handwriting. Neat, precise, sharp. "You're safe now. I'll give you time. Don't try to run. I'll find you. Matteo." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window and watched the waves crash below, wondering if the sea could hear me thinking, wondering if the darkness outside matched the one in him, or in me, because the truth I hadn't told him, not in the hospital, not in the car, not even in my silence, was that a part of me didn't feel trapped. A part of me felt chosen, and that terrified me more than anything else. I wasn't looking for him that night. I just couldn't sleep. The mansion was too quiet, the kind of quiet that made your ears ring. Not from sound, but from the weight of all the things left unsaid. I wandered barefoot through hallways that smelled like cold stone and secrets. My fingertips grazed wallpaper so expensive I was afraid to breathe on it. And then I heard it. A voice. Not Matteo's. Deep, panicked, pleading. Muffled through a door slightly ajar, down the West Wing hallway I wasn't supposed to enter. Curiosity is a dangerous thing when you're married to a man like Matteo Santoro. But I walked closer anyway. The room was dim, lit only by a desk lamp. The walls were lined with books, but the air smelled like steel. Matteo stood with his back to me, sleeves rolled to his elbows, shirt unbuttoned at the throat. Calm, still, terrifying. Across from him, on his knees, was a man I didn't recognize. Older, sweating, a dark stain on his shirt spreading slowly like a confession. Two others stood behind him, silent shadows. Guards, maybe. Soldiers. "I told you," Matteo said, voice quiet. "Once. I didn't mean, please, it was a mistake, I swear." Matteo moved so fast I almost didn't see it. 1 second, he was still. The next, he'd gripped the man by the hair and yanked his head back. A blade, thin, polished, surgical, shimmered in his hand. "I don't accept mistakes," he murmured. I erased them. I gasped. It was small, but not small enough. His head snapped toward the door. Our eyes met. Something inside me froze. Not from fear, not yet. From the rawness of him. His chest rising slowly, the blade still in his hand, blood at the corner of his jaw where the man must have fought back. He looked at me not like I'd caught him, but like I'd stepped into something ancient, holy, damned. He said nothing, just stared. Let me see him. Not the businessman, not the husband, the monster. I turned and ran, back to my room, closed the door, locked it, even knowing that meant nothing in this house. I pressed my forehead to the cool wood and breathed hard, trying to slow the shaking in my hands. My pulse throbbed in my ears, louder than anything. Minutes passed, maybe hours. I didn't move. Then, a knock. Not hard, not fast. Just one, sharp knock. I opened the door. Mateo stood there, clean now, no blood in sight. Shirt changed, hair slicked back, the image of control. But his eyes, they weren't empty. "I told you not to come down that hall," he said. "You didn't tell me why." He looked at me, long and deep, like he was weighing what part of me could still be protected. "I am what I am," he said at last, "and I don't apologize for it." I should have hated him, should have screamed. But instead, I asked, "Was he going to hurt you?" A pause. Then, "He betrayed me. Then why do I feel like I should be the one bleeding?" He stepped closer. "I didn't move. There's a reason I brought you here," he said. "I didn't want you to see that part of me yet." "Yet? I thought I could keep you untouched." I swallowed hard. "But I'm not, am I?" His gaze fell to my lips. "Not anymore." He lifted a hand, slowly, and tucked a piece of hair behind my ear. The gentleness was worse than the blade. I wanted to pull away, but I didn't. "I won't lie to you," he said. "I won't pretend to be something I'm not. You're safe here, even if the world I live in isn't." I whispered, "Why me, Mateo?" His thumb brushed my cheek. "Because you saw the darkness, and you didn't look away." He left me standing in the doorway, heartbeat strangled in my throat. And for the first time, I didn't know if I feared him, or the part of me that wanted him anyway. The first time he touched me, it wasn't with his hands. It was his gaze. Across the dinner table, half lit by candlelight, his fork paused mid-air as I lifted the wine glass to my lips. I felt it against my skin like heat, like breath. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence wrapped around my body and pressed into the hollow places I had spent my life hiding. I hated how my fingers trembled. The dining room was silent except for the sound of silver against porcelain. The meal had been prepared by people I'd never meet, served by hands that disappeared before I could thank them. But I tasted none of it. All I could feel was him. He was so still it made the air heavy, like everything inside him was waiting for permission to move. I said nothing for most of the meal, just listened to the click of my own pulse in my throat. He watched me eat, not in hunger, not in lust, with fascination, like I was a creature he'd never seen before, something rare, maybe even dangerous. And then, he spoke. "You didn't sleep last night." It wasn't a question. I looked up slowly, my voice small, but steady. "Should I have?" A pause. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "No." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was alive, dense. My heart was making too much noise inside my chest. I reached for the wine again, just to give my hand something to do. He leaned back in his chair, the fabric of his shirt pulling taut across his chest. "I regret that you saw what you saw." I shook my head before I could stop myself. "No, you don't." A beat. Then he nodded, like he appreciated the correction. "You're right," he said. "I regret that it affected you." That was Mateo. Not cruel, not kind, honest in a way that left no room to breathe. I whispered, "What else will I see?" He didn't flinch. Everything. The answer should have scared me. But what scared me more was how much I wanted it. To know what lay behind those black eyes. To understand the man who ruled the city's shadows but sat across from me with such quiet control. He was a knife without a tremor, and I was the soft place it could bury itself. After dinner, he walked me to my room. He didn't touch me. He didn't need to. The hallway was dim and endless. Every step echoed like a secret. I could feel him beside me without turning, his presence magnetic, undeniable. I wondered if he felt my heartbeat. It felt so loud, so obvious. At the door, I paused. My hand hovered over the handle. His voice was a whisper behind me. "You don't have to be afraid of me." I turned to face him. "That's not the problem." His head tilted slightly. "Then what is?" I looked at his mouth before I looked into his eyes. "I don't think I know how to be with someone I don't fear." He didn't move, but something in him shifted. A softness that didn't belong there, breaking through for half a second before it vanished. He stepped forward, slowly, carefully. His hand reached up, hovered just above my cheek, not quite touching. His breath was warm against my face. My body leaned in without permission. "I won't hurt you, Helena." I exhaled. Not physically. His mouth was so close I could taste the red wine on his breath. He whispered, "Not in any way that isn't already yours to choose." And then he stepped back, just like that, taking all the heat with him. I stood frozen as he turned and walked away, his footsteps fading into the shadows, leaving me at the threshold of a room that no longer felt like a place to sleep. It felt like a confession I hadn't made yet. Inside, I lay awake with my back to the door, my fingers tracing the edge of the ring on my finger, colder now than it had been that morning. I didn't cry, but my body remembered the way he almost touched me. And my soul whispered something I wasn't ready to hear. The house had its own pulse, a rhythm of footsteps and whispers that never reached me. Servants moved like air currents, present but invisible, the kind of people trained to see without being seen. I wandered through rooms that were both too large and too silent, filled with art I didn't understand, books in languages I couldn't read, and windows so tall they framed the ocean like it was something to be owned. Nothing belonged to me, yet everything seemed to be watching. One evening, when the weight of the ring pressed too heavy on my hand, I found myself in a room I hadn't noticed before. A study, smaller than the others, dimly lit, its shelves filled not with ledgers or law books but with poetry. I touched the spines as though they might burn me. Old editions, some worn at the edges, some annotated in a hand I recognized too well. Mateo's, sharp and controlled, every word underlined with intent. I pulled one from the shelf, a collection of Rilke. The pages smelled of time, of hands that had lingered here before mine. I sat down in the leather chair and read silently, until the words blurred with the sound of a door opening behind me. He didn't speak at first. I felt him, the way I always did before I saw him. The shift in the air, the awareness of being observed so intently, it was impossible not to react. "I didn't take you for someone who liked poetry," I whispered, closing the book halfway. His footsteps crossed the room, deliberate, unhurried. "And you?" "I don't know if I like it," I admitted, "but it feels like breathing differently, slower, deeper." I sensed the ghost of a smile in the silence that followed. Then he came closer, until his shadow fell across me. He reached past my shoulder and touched the edge of the book, his finger brushing mine. The contact was brief, but it set something trembling inside me. "I read when I can't sleep," he said. "Words are cleaner than thoughts." I looked up at him. The man I'd seen slit another's throat with no hesitation, the one who ruled fear like a kingdom. He was standing in front of me talking about sleepless nights and the comfort of lines pressed onto paper. It should have been absurd, but it wasn't. It was the most human thing I had ever heard from him. "Do they help?" I asked softly. His gaze lingered on me, not the book. Sometimes, sometimes not. I waited, half afraid he would leave, half afraid he wouldn't. My breath grew shallow under his stare. He didn't take the book from me. He let me hold it. "What's your favorite?" I asked, trying to pull words from the thickness of the moment. He reached for another volume on the shelf, opened it with the ease of someone who had touched it 100 times, and read aloud. His voice was low, measured, not dramatic, but the cadence pulled the words into my skin as if they belonged there. Every syllable was a brushstroke against my ribs, every pause a silence that drew me closer. I didn't follow the poem entirely. I didn't need to. I followed his mouth instead, the way it shaped sound, the way it lingered over syllables like he wanted them to last. When he finished, he closed the book gently, as though it were alive, and then he looked at me, really looked. Like I wasn't just a wife he had acquired through necessity, not just a bargain struck with fear and desperation, but something else, something he hadn't expected. My throat was dry. "You're not what I thought you were." His expression shifted, barely, but enough for me to see it. "And what did you think I was?" I swallowed. "A monster." He didn't argue. He didn't correct me. He simply leaned down, close enough for me to feel the warmth of his breath against my hair, close enough that my skin tightened everywhere at once. "Maybe I am," he whispered, "but monsters can bleed too." And then he walked away, leaving me with the book still open in my lap, my fingers trembling over words I hadn't really read, and a silence that throbbed in my chest like a wound I wasn't ready to touch. That night, I lay in bed and thought of his voice reading to me, slow and heavy, like a confession carved into the dark. And though I wanted to tell myself I hated him, the truth was simpler, sharper, harder to escape. I wanted to hear him again. The mansion taught me how to listen to silence. It wasn't empty here, not really. Every pause was heavy with meaning. Every echo carried the residue of lives that had walked these halls before mine. I thought I had learned its language, until I found her. It happened late, when the house was asleep. I had gone looking for something to anchor me, anything that wasn't marble or glass or locked doors. I ended up in a storage room tucked at the far end of the west wing, dusty and untouched, a forgotten place in a home where everything else gleamed. Boxes stacked high, trunks sealed shut, the smell of cedar and thyme filling the air. I shouldn't have opened them, but I did. Inside one of the trunks were clothes, delicate silks folded with care, perfumes long faded but still clinging faintly to the fabric, and beneath them, letters, dozens of them, tied with ribbon, the ink faded, the handwriting neat and soft. I sat on the floor and read until my vision blurred. They were hers, the woman who came before me, his wife, the ghost I hadn't dared ask about. She wrote of nights filled with silence, dinners where he spoke little but watched much, mornings where he disappeared without explanation. She wrote of longing, of waiting for a touch that came rarely, of falling in love with a man who gave nothing away. But beneath the loneliness in her words, there was something else, something darker, fear. One letter was different, torn at the edges, hurried. He can love, he does, but his love has a price, and I fear mine was too high. My hands shook as I folded it back into the stack. The air felt too thick, pressing against my chest. I placed everything exactly as I found it, but her words clung to me like smoke. When I left the room, I found him waiting at the end of the hall. Matteo. He didn't speak right away. He didn't need to. His eyes moved to my hands, then back to my face. He knew. I tried to walk past him, but he blocked the way. Not with force, just with presence. That was all it ever took. "You've been somewhere you shouldn't," he said quietly. My voice betrayed me. "Why did you keep her things?" He studied me, the silence stretching until it hurt. Then finally he said, "Because some ghosts deserve to stay close." My breath caught. "She was afraid of you." He didn't flinch. "So are you." It was the truth, spoken without cruelty, and yet it stung, because fear wasn't the only thing I felt anymore. "Did you love her?" I asked, almost against my will. A pause. His gaze lowered, then lifted back to mine, in the only way I knew how. It wasn't enough. It wasn't the answer I wanted, but it was more honest than anything else he could have given. I should have walked away. Instead, I whispered, "And what about me?" The question hung between us, raw and trembling. His eyes darkened, a flicker of something breaking through his composure. He stepped closer, close enough that the air shifted around us, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him seeping through my skin. His voice was low, rougher than usual. "You ask questions you're not ready to hear the answers to." But I was. I was ready, even if the truth destroyed me. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And in that stillness, his hand lifted, slow, deliberate, and brushed a strand of hair from my face. The touch was fleeting, barely there, but it sent fire through me. I wanted to lean in. I wanted to demand more. But before I could, he let his hand fall and stepped back, leaving me hollow and burning at once. "Go to your room, Helena," he said softly, "before I forget who I'm trying to be with you." And then he was gone, swallowed by the shadows of the hallway, leaving me with the ghost of a woman who came before me, and the unbearable truth that I was beginning to understand him, piece by piece, in ways she never had the chance to. That night, lying in bed with the letter's words etched into my memory, I realized something I couldn't admit aloud. I wasn't afraid of becoming her. I was afraid of wanting to. The world tilted the night they came for me. I had grown used to the safety of his walls, to the silence that hummed like a warning but never broke. I had almost convinced myself that nothing could breach it, that Matteo's presence alone was a shield no one dared to test. I was wrong. It happened on the terrace when I thought I was alone. The moon was thin, silver on the waves below, the air damp with the scent of salt. I leaned on the railing, trying to breathe in something that felt like freedom. Then I heard it, the crunch of gravel, too heavy, too sharp. Two men emerged from the shadows, strangers. Their eyes found me instantly, their movements precise, not hesitant, predators. One of them grinned when he saw the fear in my face. "Mrs. Santoro," he said as if tasting the name. "Your husband took something that doesn't belong to him. We thought we'd take something that does." My breath froze. I stepped back, but there was nowhere to go. The door behind me was too far, their bodies closing in too fast. I opened my mouth, but the scream never left. Because he was there. Matteo stepped out of the darkness like he had been waiting, like he had always known. His hands were empty, but his presence was sharper than any blade. The men froze. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Matteo spoke, his voice so calm it cut. "You shouldn't have come here." The one who had spoken laughed nervously. "We just came for—" The sound of the gunshot shattered the night. Quick, merciless, final. One man fell before he finished his sentence, blood spreading across the terrace stone. The other lunged toward me. I didn't even have time to scream before Matteo's hand gripped the man's wrist, twisted, and slammed him against the wall with a crack that made me sick. His blade flashed once in the moonlight, then there was silence again, broken only by the ocean's endless crash. I pressed myself against the railing, my knees weak, my breath ragged. My eyes found him as he turned toward me, his shirt spattered, his jaw tight, his chest rising and falling in slow, measured breaths. He didn't look at the bodies. He looked only at me. And that was worse, because in that moment I saw something I had never seen before. Not the monster, not the king, not the cold executioner, but the man who had just chosen to kill with his own hands rather than risk a stranger laying a finger on me. He walked toward me slowly, like he knew I might run, like he was giving me the chance. I didn't move. My body shook, but not from fear alone. From something heavier, sharper, something I didn't want to name. When he reached me, his hand rose, stained and trembling faintly. He didn't touch me right away. He hesitated, then cupped my face with the gentlest part of him, his palm warm, his thumb ghosting over my cheek as though I might shatter. "They would have taken you," he whispered, his voice raw. I couldn't let them. Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't cry. My lips parted, my breath uneven. I wanted to push him away, to accuse him, to scream that I had never asked for this life. But what came out was softer, broken. "Why do you care?" His eyes darkened, searching mine, the silence stretching until I thought I would drown in it. Then, with the weight of a confession, he said, "Because you are mine." The words should have terrified me. They should have felt like chains tightening around my neck. But instead, they burned low in my stomach, curling into something dangerously close to desire. He let his hand fall, stepped back, and for the first time since I'd met him, Matteo looked unsteady. Not in his body, but in his soul. Like killing had cost him something tonight. Not because of them, because of me. Later, when I lay awake in the dark, I could still feel the heat of his hand against my skin, still hear the echo of his voice in my chest. I had seen him kill, and all I could think about was the way he touched me after. The house didn't sleep after the attack. I could feel it in the way the staff moved, sharper, faster, as though the walls themselves had been warned. Yet in the morning, everything looked the same, polished and perfect, the sea stretching endless and indifferent beyond the glass. Only I was different. I carried his touch with me, his hand against my cheek, the warmth that should have felt like possession, but instead felt like protection. I hated that I couldn't shake it, hated that it stayed with me longer than the sight of blood cooling on stone. By evening, I found myself wandering again, restless, searching for something I couldn't name. My steps carried me to the library. It wasn't the grand one I had seen before with polished floors and glass cases. It was smaller, tucked into a corner of the mansion, a place he seemed to keep for himself. The door was ajar. I hesitated, then pushed it open. Matteo was inside, alone, sitting at the desk with a notebook open, his head bent, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him. The sight of him writing felt strange, too human, too intimate. He didn't look up when I entered, but he didn't tell me to leave either. I stood in the doorway until the silence grew too heavy, then crossed the room. My hand brushed along the spines of books until I stopped near his desk. "What are you writing?" I asked softly. Finally, he raised his head. His eyes caught me like they always did, still and unreadable. Slowly, he closed the notebook and slid it toward me. I hesitated before opening it. His handwriting was sharp, exact, every line deliberate. Not accounts, not lists, not plans. Thoughts, fragments of sentences. Reflections scattered like broken glass. Some monsters are born, some are made. I'm not sure which I am. There is a silence in her eyes I've never been able to name. It unnerves me more than a gun to my head. If she knew the weight of my sins, she would run. And yet, part of me hopes she never does. I felt my throat tighten. I looked up at him, but he didn't move. His face gave nothing away, but his hands were tense on the desk, as though bracing for rejection. "You write about me," I whispered. "Yes. Why?" His jaw shifted, the smallest fracture in his calm. "Because I can't say it." The room closed in around me. My heart beat so loudly I thought he could hear it. I should have walked away. I should have handed the notebook back and pretended none of it mattered. Instead, I let my fingers linger on the words, tracing the grooves of his pen as though I could touch the place inside him that had written them. "You don't have to be afraid of words," I said. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving mine. "Words make things real." "And isn't that what you want?" The silence between us stretched. I felt it, thick and trembling, like the moment before a storm breaks. Then he stood, slowly, his movements deliberate, controlled, as though any sudden shift might shatter the fragile thread between us. He came around the desk until he stood close enough that I could feel the heat of him. He didn't touch me, but the space between us vibrated with everything he wasn't saying. "What do you see when you look at me, Helena?" he asked. I swallowed. My voice was barely a breath. A man who wants to be more than he believes he is. His eyes closed, just for a moment, as though my words had struck somewhere he'd kept hidden too long. When he opened them again, the monster was gone. All I saw was the man. He lifted a hand, hesitated, then let it fall back to his side. His restraint was louder than any touch could have been. "If I let you see all of me," he murmured. "You won't survive it." I should have been afraid. But the truth was, I didn't want to survive without seeing it. That night, back in my room, I held the memory of his words like a secret pressed against my skin. The man who ruled the city's shadows had handed me the most fragile part of him, and I couldn't stop trembling at the thought that one day I might break it. I tried to hate him. I told myself every morning that I should, that the ring on my finger was nothing but a shackle, that his silence was just another weapon meant to bend me. I told myself that the notebook I had read in his library was a trap, words carefully chosen to weaken me, to confuse me, to make me believe there was something tender hidden inside the man who killed without hesitation. But when I closed my eyes, all I could hear was his voice. The quiet way he had said my name, the restraint that trembled in his hand when he almost touched me, the way his eyes had closed as though my words had pierced something even bullets could not reach. And I hated myself more than I hated him. The days stretched in strange patterns. Meals where I pretended not to watch him. Evenings where I walked the halls alone but felt him watching me anyway. Sometimes he passed me without speaking, his presence so heavy I couldn't breathe until he was gone. Other times he paused, just long enough for his gaze to linger, for my body to betray me with the ache of wanting what I swore I would never take. I began avoiding the library, because the memory of his words lived there, waiting to trap me again. But avoiding it only made me think of it more. And him, always him. One night, I stood at my window and whispered into the glass, as though the ocean below might carry my confession away. If I hate you less, I'll lose myself. The words fogged the glass, disappeared, and left me trembling in the silence. Later, as I walked the corridor back to my room, I heard the faintest sound, a piano, low and unsteady, coming from somewhere deep within the house. I followed it, bare feet soft against the floor, the notes pulling me like a thread. I found him in another hidden room, this one smaller, darker. The piano old but cared for. He sat with his back to me, his posture straight, his hands moving slowly over the keys. The melody was broken, unfinished, like someone remembering rather than performing. I didn't breathe. I just listened. The man I had seen slit throats and command silence was sitting alone, playing music for no one, for himself, for ghosts. The last note lingered, then fell into nothing. He rested his hands on the keys but didn't move. He knew I was there. "Do you play often?" I asked softly. He didn't turn. "Not anymore." "Why?" A pause, heavy and sharp. "Because it makes me remember." I stepped closer, each word daring me forward. "And forgetting is easier?" His shoulders tensed. He said nothing. I watched the curve of his back, the stillness of his body, and I wanted to touch him. Not out of pity, not even out of curiosity, but because my hands ached with the need to know if he felt real beneath them. I stopped myself. Instead, I whispered, "Play again." For a long moment, he was still. Then his fingers pressed the keys, softer this time, slower. A melody that felt like confession, like a language without words. I closed my eyes and let it fill me, each note slipping beneath my skin until I couldn't tell if it was music or heartbeat. When he finished, the silence was unbearable. I opened my eyes to find him looking at me now, his gaze dark, unguarded, as though the music had stripped him of everything he used to hide behind. We said nothing, but in that silence, something shifted, something broke. I left the room before I did something I couldn't take back. My body shook as I walked away, my chest tight, my hands trembling. I wanted to scream at myself for the weakness, for the way my soul leaned toward him despite everything. That night, alone in bed, I buried my face in the pillow and whispered a truth I had no courage to say aloud. "I don't hate you anymore." And the sound of it terrified me more than the monsters I thought he was. The storm came without warning. The sky fractured open, and rain lashed against the windows like the sea itself had risen to devour the house. Thunder rolled through the halls, low and endless, and the lights flickered as though even the electricity was afraid. I stood at my window, watching the darkness twist into something alive, and felt it echo inside me. I wasn't afraid of the storm. I was afraid of what it woke in me. My door opened without a knock. Mateo stood there, his shirt damp, his hair darker from the rain, as though he had stepped out of the chaos itself and carried it with him. His eyes found me instantly, sharp and burning, and for the first time, he didn't look like a man holding himself together. He looked like he was unraveling. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My breath caught somewhere between my chest and my throat as he crossed the room. The storm outside raged louder, lightning flooding the walls with flashes of white. He stopped in front of me, so close the heat of him erased the cold of the glass behind my back. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched, as though he was fighting a war inside himself. "You should tell me to leave," he said, his voice rough, unsteady. "I can't." The words escaped before I could stop them, trembling but true. Something broke in his eyes. The restraint I had seen in him, always coiled, always locked in silence, snapped like a string pulled too tight. His hand rose, slow at first, then desperate, cupping the side of my face. The warmth of his palm spread through me, stronger than the storm, stronger than the fear. I leaned into it. I didn't mean to. My body moved before my mind, surrendering to the place it had been aching for. His thumb brushed my cheek, a touch so gentle it burned, and my lips parted on a breath I couldn't control. "Helena," he whispered, and it was the first time my name sounded like a prayer. The kiss wasn't soft. It couldn't be. It was fire meeting fire, a collision born of everything we had denied. His mouth crashed into mine with hunger, with rage, with years of silence breaking open all at once. I gasped against him, my fingers clutching his shirt, dragging him closer because distance was unbearable now. The storm roared, thunder shaking the glass, rain pounding like 1,000 hands, but all I felt was him, his lips, his breath, the taste of him searing into me. His hands framed my face as though I were fragile, even as his body pressed against mine with a force that left no space, no doubt, no escape. I should have pushed him away. Instead, I pulled him closer. He groaned into the kiss, low and broken, as though he had been starving and I was the first taste of air he'd allowed himself in years. His hands slid down, gripping my waist, anchoring me against him. My body arched, giving in, giving everything, as if it had always been waiting for this moment to collapse into his. When he pulled back, his forehead pressed against mine, his breath ragged, his eyes dark with something that scared me more than hate ever could. Need. "If I take this from you," he whispered, his voice shaking, "there's no giving it back." My lips brushed against his as I answered, "Then don't give it back." The look in his eyes shattered me. A man who had killed without hesitation, who commanded armies with a glance, was trembling because of me, because of this. He kissed me again, slower now, deeper, like claiming and surrender all at once. His mouth moved with reverence, his hands gripping me as though he could fuse me to him and never let go. Every touch was fire, every breath a confession neither of us could hide anymore. The storm outside raged, but inside, it was quiet. Only the sound of our breaths, the taste of his lips, the certainty that nothing would be the same after this night. When his mouth left mine, trailing against my jaw, my throat, my skin burned under every press of his lips. My hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, needing him the way the ocean needs the shore, violent, endless, inevitable. We fell into the storm together, no longer fighting, no longer pretending, and in his arms, I understood something I had been afraid to admit even to myself. I didn't just want him. I belonged to him. The house was quiet when I woke, but it was a different quiet than before. Not the silence of marble halls and locked doors, not the silence of being watched or judged or owned. This silence was soft, fragile, breathing beside me. The storm had passed. The sea lay still beyond the window, pale light stretching across the room like a blessing I didn't dare touch. My body ached in places I hadn't known could ache, not from pain, but from surrender, from the memory of his hands, his mouth, his weight. Matteo lay next to me, half turned on his side, the sheets tangled low around his hips, his arm draped loosely across me. I stared at him for too long, my heart uneven, my chest tight. In sleep, he wasn't the monster. His face was still, his mouth relaxed, the lines of control softened. He looked almost young, as though time itself had released him for a moment. I wanted to memorize him like this, because I knew the day would take it away. I moved slowly, careful not to wake him, and yet his fingers tightened around my waist the moment I shifted. His eyes opened, dark and sharp even in the haze of morning. He studied me, silent, and for a breath I thought he regretted it, thought he would pull away and rebuild the walls I had seen fall in the storm. But then his hand slid to my cheek, rough fingers brushing lightly over my skin, and he whispered, "Stay." One word, and it was enough to break something inside me all over again. "I wasn't going anywhere," I said softly, though the truth was, I hadn't known what I was going to do. The part of me that had lived in survival for so long had already begun preparing an escape, because that was what I knew. But his hand, his voice, the look in his eyes, they anchored me. He pulled me closer, his forehead resting against mine, his breath warm. "I don't ask for much, Helena. But this, last night, don't take it from me." I closed my eyes. The weight of his words pressed into my chest. It wasn't a command. It wasn't even a plea. It was something rarer, something I hadn't expected to ever hear from him. Vulnerability. I won't, I whispered. For a long time we lay like that, the morning stretching around us, the world outside irrelevant. His hand traced slow, absent circles on my back, and for once there was no tension in my body, no need to guard myself. It was peace, terrifying in its unfamiliarity. When I finally sat up, wrapping the sheet around me, he didn't stop me. He just watched. His gaze was heavy, not with possession, but with something deeper, quieter, something I didn't yet have the courage to name. I stood by the window, staring at the ocean, my fingers clutching the fabric to my chest. The waves moved steady and endless as if nothing had happened, as if the world hadn't changed. But inside me, everything had. Mateo, I said softly, without turning. Yes. Do you ever regret the life you chose? Silence stretched, thick as the tide. When he answered, his voice was low, certain. No, but sometimes I regret what it took from me. I turned then, and the look in his eyes almost undid me. A man who had killed without hesitation, who commanded power with a glance, was lying in my bed speaking to me like his soul was bleeding through his chest. I crossed the room and sat back beside him, my hand brushing his arm. He caught my wrist gently, holding it there, his thumb stroking the inside of my pulse. I don't know who you were before this, I whispered. You don't need to, he said. You know who I am now. And for the first time, I believed him. That night had changed us. The storm had broken something open, and no matter how much fear still coiled inside me, I knew I couldn't close it again. When I lay back down, his arms wrapped around me without hesitation, pulling me against his chest. His heartbeat was steady, slow, a rhythm that anchored me. I fell asleep to it, my body finally surrendering to something it had never known. Peace. Peace doesn't last in his world. It can't. I should have known it, should have remembered that calm is only ever a pause between storms, but I let myself believe. I let myself breathe. I let myself sleep in his arms and wake in the steady rhythm of a man who was never steady. The break came quietly, not with violence, not with screams, with a voice carried down the hall when I wasn't meant to hear. I had gone looking for him that afternoon, restless, the taste of his touch still living in my skin. The doors to his office were closed, but voices bled through the cracks. Men I didn't recognize, their tones urgent, deferential. And then his voice, low, certain, commanding. I should have walked away. I should have respected the walls he built around that part of himself. But something in me froze when I heard the name, my name, not Helena, not Santoro, my old name, the one I had buried the night he put a ring on my finger. The blood drained from me. My body moved on its own, pressing closer to the door, every nerve straining for sound. The fire was never meant for them, one of the men said. My lungs locked. Mateo's answer came sharp, final, collateral. They were warned not to cross into my territory. They chose wrong, collateral. The word echoed through me like a blade. My parents. My mother's voice, my father's laugh, the smell of smoke in my hair as the flames swallowed everything I knew, collateral. I staggered back, hand clamped over my mouth to keep the scream inside. My knees threatened to give way, but I forced myself down the hall, away from that door, away from him, my body trembling with a cold I couldn't shake. In my room, I collapsed onto the floor, the world spinning around me. Images poured in unbidden, the firelight on the walls, Davy's tiny hand clutching mine, the sound of sirens, the emptiness that followed. And now his voice, Mateo's voice, calling it necessary, unavoidable, nothing more than a move on a board. I pressed my fists to my eyes, but it didn't erase the truth. The man I had let touch me, kiss me, the man I had let inside me, had also destroyed the life I had before him. The tears came hard, relentless. I hadn't cried like that in years, not since the night everything burned. I thought I had no tears left, but now they came like blood, torn out of me. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Long enough for the sun to bleed out and shadows to creep across the floor. Long enough for the silence to turn suffocating. A knock, low, steady, his. Helena. I couldn't answer. My body was too rigid, my throat raw. The door opened anyway. He stepped inside, and in the dim light I saw his outline, tall, immovable. The man I had begun to believe was mine. His eyes found me on the floor. For once he looked unsure. What happened? He asked. I laughed. Or something like it. A sound sharp and cracked. What happened? You happened. His body tensed. Tell me. I stood unsteady but burning, my hands shaking. My parents? The fire? It was you. His jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. He didn't rush to comfort me or soften the truth. He just looked at me, silent, waiting for me to break. "You killed them," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "No," he said, voice low, precise. "I didn't light the match. But yes, it was my war, my command, my consequence." I stared at him, my heart tearing itself apart. Collateral. The word hit him. I saw it in the flicker of his eyes, in the way his chest rose sharply, but he didn't take it back. Yes, my body recoiled as though he had struck me. I wanted to run, to disappear, to claw my way out of the skin that had lain beneath his hand. "Everything I am," I said, my voice breaking, "everything I lost was because of you." He took a step closer. I flinched. His face twisted, not with anger, but with something deeper, heavier. "And yet," he murmured, "you are the only thing I cannot let go." I shook my head, tears streaming. "You already did. The night you set the fire, you let me go before you ever knew my name." I pushed past him, his hand brushing the air as though he wanted to stop me but didn't. I ran down the hall, the echo of his voice and the weight of my past chasing me into the darkness. And for the first time since I had entered his world, I hated not only him, I hated the part of me that still wanted him anyway. The city hadn't changed, but I had. Its streets were the same, narrow, cracked, smelling of rain-soaked asphalt and exhaust, neon signs flickering like tired promises, but I no longer belonged to it. I walked fast, hood pulled low, eyes sharp in every direction, though no one was chasing me. Not yet. I knew he could find me if he wanted to. Mateo could tear this city apart stone by stone until I appeared in his hands again. But for now, I was invisible. And invisibility was the only freedom I had left. I carried no bag, no money, no plan. Just the weight of the truth pressing against my ribs until it hurt to breathe. My parents, their laughter, their warmth, the safe world they had built for me and for Davi, all of it gone, not by chance, not by some cruel twist of fate, but because of him. Because of the man I had let into my body, into my soul. The rain came suddenly, heavy, soaking my hair, clinging to my clothes until I felt raw and stripped bare. I didn't care. I walked without direction, my hands shoved into my pockets, trembling from more than the cold. I wanted to scream, but the city wouldn't care. I wanted to hit something until my fists bled, but it wouldn't give me my parents back. I wanted to forget Mateo's voice calling them collateral, but forgetting was impossible when my skin still remembered the way he had whispered my name like a prayer. I stopped under the awning of a closed shop, gasping, shaking, trying to hold myself together. People passed without looking. They always did. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the wet ground, knees pulled to my chest, rain dripping off the edge of the awning onto my shoes, and I let myself break. The sobs came like waves, tearing through me, unstoppable. My hands clutched at my own arms, as if holding myself was the only thing keeping me from dissolving into the night. My parents' faces burned in my memory, and with them came Mateo's, his eyes, his touch, his voice, twisting together until I couldn't tell if I was mourning or craving or both. I hated him. I loved him. The two truths warred inside me until I felt hollow. "Miss, are you all right?" The voice startled me. I looked up to see a stranger, older, kind-eyed, holding a bag of groceries. His concern was genuine, and that made it worse. "I'm fine," I croaked, wiping at my face though the tears kept coming. He hesitated, then nodded and walked on, disappearing into the rain like everyone else. I sat there for what felt like hours, until the night bled into dawn and the city began to stir. My body was stiff, my throat raw, but I forced myself to stand. I couldn't go back to him. I couldn't stay here either. I was caught between worlds, between who I had been and who I had become. For the first time, I wondered what it would mean to leave everything behind. Mateo, the mansion, even Davi, safe under his protection. Could I abandon them both to escape the weight of his sins? Could I forgive myself if I did? The thought clawed at me. My brother was alive because of Mateo, alive and breathing because I had said yes that night in the hospital. If I left, if I turned my back, would Davi still be safe? Or would I be condemning him again? The question burned more than the rain. I wandered into a church, small and hidden, the kind that always smelled of wax and dust. Candles flickered and rose, shadows dancing across stone saints that had never known love or blood or betrayal. I sat in the back pew, hands shaking, staring at the altar as though it could give me an answer. But all I heard was Mateo's voice in my memory. I didn't light the match. But yes, it was my war, my command, my consequence. And beneath it, softer, breaking, another truth. You are the only thing I cannot let go. I pressed my palms to my eyes until stars burned behind them. I wanted to cut him out of me. I wanted to erase every touch, every look, every moment that had softened the edges of the monster and made me believe there was a man underneath. But I couldn't. Even now, alone and trembling, I couldn't. When I left the church, the sky had cleared, pale light stretching over the city. The streets were alive with noise again, and for the first time, I felt how small I was against it all. Small, but not powerless. If he had taken everything from me, then what I did next would be mine alone. Not his, not theirs, mine. And for the first time since the fire, I felt something that almost tasted like freedom. The city dried around me as if it had decided not to remember the rain. I walked without seeing, the clatter of morning traffic rattling through my bones, the ring cold against my skin like a small moon refusing to warm. I tried to imagine a life where I kept moving until the streets ran out, where I became a blur no one could follow, where his voice could not reach me. The fantasy held for 3 breaths, then broke under the weight of everything I knew. I ducked into a cafe that smelled of burnt sugar and old coffee. The TV above the counter muttered the day's lies to people too tired to argue. I wrapped my hands around a chipped mug and stared through the window as if the glass might tell me who to be. When the door opened, the bell gave a small, apologetic sound. I didn't look. I felt. He didn't send Mateo. He sent a woman. She sat opposite me without asking, coat still buttoned, hair damp from air that hadn't made up its mind. She set a phone on the table, screen down as though it were something tender. "Helena," she said, low enough that my name didn't belong to the room. "My name is Rena. He doesn't know I'm here." I wanted to laugh. My throat wouldn't allow it. "Then you shouldn't be." "Probably." Her mouth twitched, not a smile. "He'd have me buried in paperwork for a week." I stared at the lowered phone as if it might burn through the wood. "Tell him I'm not coming back. I didn't come to collect you." She folded her hands, the kind of careful gesture people make when every movement could set off a wire. "I came to tell you something you would hate me for if I didn't." The world narrowed to the space between us. Behind the counter, a milk frother sighed. Someone laughed too loudly. My heartbeat ignored all of it. "Varga called a parley," she said. "Neutral ground. The old glassworks by the docks at dusk. No soldiers inside. 1 man each. You know what that means. A killbox dressed as tradition. A handshake staged for a firing squad." I swallowed. "He won't take it." "He already did." Rena's eyes didn't move from mine. "Because he thinks he owes you the truth and he won't risk a war spilling into the streets while you're out here alone. He'll walk in clean to keep everything contained." A heat rose through me that wasn't anger, not only. Something like the snap of a wire. "And then what?" "Then he doesn't walk out." She lifted the phone, turned it face up, and slid it toward me. The screen showed a map, a blue dot pulsing over the long dead heart of the factory. "You needed to know. Whatever you decide after, that's yours." I could have told her to leave. I could have told her that none of this changed what he had done to my family. The words gathered behind my teeth, a tide I refused to open my mouth to. I stared at the map until the blue dot blurred. In its soft glow, I saw the night he stepped out of darkness and put his body between mine and death. I saw the way his hands had trembled when he touched my face after. I saw the monster who kept a notebook he would die before reading aloud. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, the question barely breath. "Because he doesn't believe he can be saved," she said softly. "And because some debts are paid in the direction you point your body when a man you hate is about to die." The cafe was too bright, the air too thin. I pushed the mug away and stood. My legs felt like someone else's. Rena rose with me, small and unmovable. "You can't stop him," she said. "You can only change what it means." "What does it mean?" "That he doesn't die believing you ran." Outside, the sunlight had a mean edge. The city sounded like metal. I walked until my feet remembered they were allowed to run, then ran until my breath scraped. I didn't know where I was going until a black car slid into view and kept up without pressing. The window lowered. The driver's eyes were kind in a face built for bad news. "Mrs. Santoro," he said, the formality quiet. "Instructions?" I opened the back door and climbed in, rain-sour air trapped in the leather. My hands were steady now. They surprised me. "To the docks." He didn't ask which. Of course he didn't. The car moved like a decision already made. I texted one message with fingers that refused to shake. Not to Mateo, to Davy's nurse. A single sentence. "He's safe?" The answer came before the next light turned green. Stable. Sleeping. I let the breath leave my body in a careful exhale. The city unwound into warehouses and cranes, into long corridors of wind and salt that tasted like endings. Rena's map pulsed inside my skull. The old glassworks rose ahead, windows punched out, ribs of metal showing through skin. A place the sea had almost reclaimed and then refused. The driver stopped 2 blocks short. The silence that followed felt respectful. "You could wait here?" he said, not turning. "Or leave." "I could," I said. He nodded, accepting my refusal even before I made it. I reached for the door and paused. "If he comes out without me, take him home. If he comes out without you," he said gently, "he won't go home." I stepped onto the pavement and the wind snapped my hair across my mouth. I tasted salt, rust, the memory of smoke. I walked the last blocks alone, each footfall a choice I had to make twice. My heart hammered a code my head wouldn't translate. A gull screamed above me like a bad omen with wings. At the side entrance, the chain hung loose, as if someone had cut it to be courteous. I slipped through. The warehouse swallowed the light. Dust hung in the air, glittering like the ghosts of all the glass that had once been made here. Voices carried from the belly of the place, low, measured, men trying on the shape of peace long enough to aim. I moved toward them, my steps almost soundless on concrete pitted with time. The closer I came, the more my body burned with a certainty that had nothing to do with right and everything to do with truth. I could leave. I could let the world be rid of him and live a life built on clean lines and smaller lies. Or I could walk into the dead center of the thing that ruined me and light it with the only tinder I had left. I reached the doorway and stopped, breath poised, spine straight. On the other side, a circle of men. Mateo stood alone, unarmed, suit dark as a confession, the tilt of his head familiar enough to steady me. Across from him, Vargas smiled like a man who had practiced in mirrors. My pulse went quiet. I stepped forward. The air inside the glassworks was heavy with dust and silence. Every sound echoed, every movement sharpened into something dangerous. Mateo stood in the center of it all, a black flame in a ring of wolves. Varga lounged across from him, a predator dressed in arrogance, his men flanking the shadows with hands near their guns but not yet drawing. I should have stayed at the doorway. I should have been invisible, but something inside me refused. I walked forward, each step steady, though my pulse was loud enough to betray me. The eyes in the room turned, one by one, first with surprise, then with recognition, then with hunger. "Helena," Mateo said, not shouted, not demanded, just said my name as if he had been waiting for it to fill the room. Varga's smile widened. "Ah, the wife." He gestured lazily with a cigarette between his fingers. "Beautiful, tragic, the perfect weakness." The men around him laughed, but it was thin, forced. Mateo's gaze never left me. He was still, but the air around him rippled, dangerous, as though the wrong word would set everything ablaze. I stepped into the circle, my body between them, the taste of iron on my tongue, though I hadn't bitten myself. "If you want him," I said, my voice trembling but loud enough to carry, "you'll have to kill me first." The silence that followed was sharp, a blade pressed to skin. Varga tilted his head, studying me. "That can be arranged." Mateo moved then, so sudden the dust seemed to scatter away from him. He was at my side, his hand gripping my arm, not to pull me back but to steady me. His voice was low, rough. "Helena, no." I turned to him. His eyes burned, but beneath the fire was something else. Fear. Real fear. I had never seen it in him before. "I won't let them take you," I whispered. "Not while I can still stand." Varga laughed again, flicking ash onto the ground. "Look at this. The great Mateo Santoro, shielded by a woman. How poetic." Mateo's jaw clenched. He stepped forward, his body half in front of mine, but I pushed against him, refusing to disappear behind his shadow. "This ends tonight," I said, my voice louder now, echoing against the steel beams. "You think killing him will make you stronger? It won't. It will make you hunted." Varga's eyes narrowed. "And what are you? His prophet?" "I'm the one thing you don't understand," I said, "because you think love is weakness. But it isn't. It's the only thing in this room that doesn't fear you." The words weren't planned. They rose out of me like fire, burning through the fear, leaving only truth. The men shifted, uncertain, their laughter gone. For the first time, doubt flickered in Varga's expression. Mateo's hand tightened on mine. He didn't speak, but I felt the tremor in his grip, the way my words had cut through more than just the enemy. Varga flicked his cigarette aside, his voice cold. "You should pray that your husband bleeds fast, because when I'm finished with him, you'll wish you stayed in the shadows." The guns rose then, a metallic symphony. Mateo pulled me against him, his body a shield, his voice sharp as steel. "Get her out." The men around us froze, not because of the command, but because of the fury behind it. And then the first shot rang. Chaos shattered the room. Gunfire lit the air, men shouting, shadows moving too fast to follow. Matteo pushed me down, his body covering mine as bullets sparked off the concrete. The sound was deafening, but all I could hear was his heartbeat against my ear. Steady, violent, alive. He fired back with precision, each shot an answer, each movement a map of survival carved into his bones. I clung to him, not from fear, but from the certainty that if I let go, the world would swallow us both. When the noise finally dulled, smoke hung in the air, acrid and heavy. Bodies lay scattered, groaning or still. Varga was gone, slipped into the shadows like the coward he was. Matteo stood, pulling me up with him, his chest heaving, blood on his sleeve that wasn't his. His eyes locked on mine, burning, broken. "You shouldn't have come," he said. "I couldn't let you die," I whispered back. For a moment he just looked at me, silence heavy between us. And then, as if the weight of the world had cracked inside him, he pulled me into his arms and held me so tightly I could barely breathe. Not possession, not power, just need. And in that ruined factory, with smoke still curling from the floor and blood soaking the dust, I felt the truth settle in my bones. I wasn't fighting him anymore. I was fighting myself, and I was losing. He tried to stand like nothing had been taken from him, but when I felt the heat through his sleeve, I knew the lie of it. The dark stain wasn't bravado, it was gravity. His breath went shallow, his hand tightened on my wrist, and the world that had just exploded began to narrow to the sound of blood finding exits it shouldn't. "Sit," I said, but the word came out as breath. He didn't obey. He sagged, and I took his weight. We moved together toward a side corridor littered with glass dust, the air tasting of metal and old ash. I pressed him against a pillar and tore the cloth where it clung. The wound was high along the ribs, gouged, angry, not mortal if I made it answer me. "Look at me," I whispered. His eyes tracked mine, black and lucid. "You shouldn't have come. You shouldn't be bleeding." He almost smiled, then winced. I ripped my scarf, folded it, pressed hard. His jaw locked. My hands were steady because they had to be. When I felt the pulse slow under the pressure, the floor returned to its place. Outside, boots scraped concrete and then faded. Whoever survived had decided to live another day. He said my name like a confession. "Helena, save your breath." It was supposed to be clean. I laughed once. It felt like breaking a bone. "You don't get clean." Silence fell between us, a hard, honest thing. The driver appeared at the far door as a shadow, and then a man, eyes sweeping, voice low. 5 minutes, he said. "Then the cops will own the street." He slid a kit across the floor and turned his back to buy us privacy that didn't exist. I knelt. The kit snapped open under my fingers. Gauze, tape, a small ampule of lidocaine, curved needles like half moons. My hands remembered what hunger teaches. You can learn anything if a body demands it. I cleaned the wound. Iodine burned the air. His breath caught, and sweat prickled along his temple. He didn't flinch from me. He watched me like a man standing on the last step before a fall. "Tell me you'll leave," he said, voice rough. "Tell me you'll get in that car and disappear from this." "No, you deserved an easier monster." "I didn't choose a monster," I said, threading the needle with a strand that looked too thin to keep a life inside a skin. "I chose the truth." I stitched him closed, careful even, pulling edges together that wanted to stay apart. Blood slicked my fingers. He reached up once and covered my wrist, not to stop me, but to anchor me. I felt the tremor in his grip and understood it wasn't pain alone. When I tied the last knot, I pressed my palm to his ribs and counted his breaths with my own until they matched. He exhaled. "If you ask me to pay, I'll pay." "For what?" "For the fire." The words were iron. For the bodies that lived inside that word, I used like a lever. Collateral. Say it and I'll wear the punishment you choose. Something in me curled against the memory of smoke. I kept my palm steady. "You don't get absolution because you bleed for me in a warehouse." "I didn't come for absolution." "What did you come for?" "To let you judge me," he said, and the rawness of it cut deeper than the wound. "Name the penance. I'll take it." I closed my eyes and saw my mother's hands tying my hair, my father's laugh in a kitchen too small for our dreams. When I opened them, the man in front of me didn't look like a king or a knife. He looked like someone stripped of armor because the person wielding the blade was me. "I want names," I said. "Every man who turned that order into flame, every ledger, every call, every door that opened to make it possible. You'll have them. I want the word collateral erased from your life, from the mouths of your men, from the maps you draw and the choices you justify. It's gone. I want Davy protected by something that isn't fear." His mouth tightened. "I can't promise a world without fear. I can promise a wall higher than any you've ever seen, and a life far from this, one he builds with his own hands. Then build it, I said. And this, I pressed gently where the stitches pulled, is the last time your blood makes the point I'm already hearing. He looked at me a long time, something breaking and setting inside his gaze. I'll dismantle what can be dismantled without burning the city that feeds on it. I will cut rot and leave bone. Not because it's strategy, because you said so. Not for me, I corrected softly. With me. He nodded once, a vow sealed without ceremony. The driver coughed a single syllable of sound. Time. Mateo tried to stand under his own power. Pride failed him. I shouldered his weight and we moved, step by step, the corridor swallowing our echoes. On the threshold he paused, breath shallow. I would have died in there, he said. Not as boast, not as poetry. I walked toward it. I know. I thought maybe that was the right ending. It isn't, I said, and the certainty surprised me with its warmth. Not the one we're writing. In the car, I held the compression as the city reversed around us, cranes and stacks and gray water sliding past like a film already out of time. I checked my phone. Davi. Stable. Vitals calm. I let him sleep in my head. Safe. Mateo's hand found mine where it held his bandage. He didn't remove it, just rested there. The weight of it, a question. I can't change what I was, he said quietly. You can reveal who you are, I answered. And you can stop pretending that the worst of you is the whole of you. He turned his head to the window, as if the glass could make sense of the man inside it. When he spoke again, the words were bare. I never learned to ask. I only learned to take. So ask. The corner of his mouth twitched, not a smile, an ache. He faced me, and the movement pulled at the stitches. Pain flashed and receded. Stay, he said, the word raw. Not as a possession. As the person who tells me when to put the gun down. I thought of the ring, cold against my skin, and the way his notebook held a map of a soul too proud to beg. I thought of the warehouse dust glittering like fallen stars over men who would not all go home. I thought of my parents and how love is sometimes the only sentence heavy enough to carry the dead without dropping the living. I'm not ready to forgive, I said. I'm not asking, he whispered. I am ready to fight for the thing between us if you let it change the world you command. Yes, then take me home, I said, and laced our fingers, his blood drying in the lines of my palm like a signature I didn't sign, but refused to wash away yet. The car slid into the artery of the city. Dawn edged the buildings with a thin light, the kind that makes truth look almost bearable. He closed his eyes, just once, and when he opened them again, I saw it. The monster learning the shape of a man, not by denial, but by the weight of a choice he'd have to make every hour we were alive. Home received us like a bruise, tender to the touch, dark where it shouldn't be. The house doctor came and went with a quiet face, instructions murmured to Rena, a long list of things Mateo would ignore if I let him. I didn't. I sat on the edge of the bed with my hand on his ribs, counting his breaths and my own until they moved together, a stubborn duet against pain. He slept because I willed him to, because my palm said stay, and his body listened. By noon, light pooled on the floor like a promise. He woke with a wince and a whisper of my name, and tried to apologize for something that didn't fit into words. I stopped him with a shake of my head. We had spoken enough with blood and vows. Language could catch up later. He asked me to walk with him. Stubborn pride made him stand without help. Stubborn love made me slide an arm around his waist anyway. We moved through corridors that had watched us become other people, down to a door I'd noticed but never crossed. He drew a small key from the bandage-white pocket of his shirt, metal winking like a confession, and opened the room. No gold, no throne, steel and paper. The air smelled of ink and old decisions. A table long enough for war, a wall of locked drawers, a safe sunk into concrete, screens gone dark until his hand woke them. He stood in the center and looked at me as if the room belonged to my gaze. These are the rooms my enemies think they want, he said, voice even, breath careful. They are wrong. He slid a keyring toward me across the table. Not ornate, heavy, practical. The sound it made against the wood was a line being crossed. You will hold what I hold. You will open what I open. If you say no, it is no. If you say protect, a circle is drawn and it does not break. I felt the weight in my palm and in my bones. Keys don't change the world, I said softly. Choices do. Then make them, he answered. No performance, no flourish, just surrender where I had never expected to find it. With me. I sorted the ring with my fingers as if learning a new alphabet. He unlocked the safe and lifted out ledgers with spines tired from secrets, placed them where my hands could choose them. Names, roots, numbers that had once burned cities. I didn't look away. I turned pages and let them cut me where they needed to, then closed one book with care and put my palm flat on it. No fires, I said. Erase the word that made my life ash. There will be no civilians in your math. Children are not variables. Hospitals, schools, shelters, your shadow does not touch them. You fund the places where fear sleeps, and you never tax them with it. He nodded, a quiet yes that felt like a signature. Done. Pull men off anything that trades on bodies, I continued. If your empire needs the broken to survive, let it starve. We rework the maps. We starve rot and feed bone. Yes, you will make restitution when you can do so without painting targets on those who receive it. Anonymous, clean, no cameras, no glory. His mouth tightened, then loosened. Yes. And Davy, I said, the syllables steadier than my pulse. His world is built away from this one. Your protection around him is invisible and absolute. No debts, no test of loyalty. He owes you nothing. He didn't hesitate. Agreed. I could feel the room listening, the table learning our language. He reached for a drawer, retrieved a black card and a slim phone, set them on the stack. You call, they move, he said, something like pride and fear braided in the admission. And if anyone in this house forgets what you just made law, they'll answer to me before they ever reach you. They'll answer to both of us, I corrected, and the corner of his mouth bent as if relief could be a private smile. We called a council at dusk. They came in dark suits with knives in their eyes, men built by hunger and sharpened by the years he had ruled them. I sat at his right, not behind, my shoulder touching his sleeve, the stitches under my palm a metronome against my nerves. He didn't speak first. He looked at me as if yielding a weapon and a name. I spoke. Not long, not loud. I gave them rules that tasted like salt and steel, and I gave them reasons that felt like survival measured in days rather than glory measured in graves. They did not cheer. They didn't need to. They listened because he listened, and when a man at the far end let disrespect flicker across his face, Mateo did not raise his voice. He folded his napkin and said the man's name with a softness that ended argument. The room learned the new map, my voice drawing roads, his silence enforcing borders. After the house exhaled, night pressed its ear to the windows. He walked me back to the steel room and turned off each screen until only our faces remained in the glass. He set his pistol on the table, not as a threat, as an offering, and slid his notebook across to me, the one that had cut me open in the library. The elastic band left a pale groove on the cover. Keys, he said. And the thing keys can't open. I didn't take the gun. I took the book, and with it the weight of the man who had written inside. I touched the ridge of stitches above his ribs, felt the pulse under skin, a stubborn drum. You gave me doors, I breathed. Now we build the rooms. His hand found the back of my neck and rested there. Warm, careful. Tell me where to put the windows. Facing the people we once turned our backs on, I said. Facing the part of yourself you kept in the dark. We stood in the room that had made him a king, and I watched him choose to be a man. The keys were not cold anymore. They had warmed in my palm the way a promise warms when it becomes a plan. Somewhere in the house, the sea kept folding itself against the cliff, teaching stone the patience of waves. I lifted the ring once like a small bell, its sound close and bright, and slid it into my pocket with a quiet yes that lived in my throat instead of the air. Tomorrow, I said, and it felt like a vow to both of us and to the city we were about to unlearn together. He nodded, a breath turning into agreement, and we walked out side by side, neither of us leading, both of us moving the weight forward. Morning found us in the bones of the house, where light fell in clean ribs across the stone and the day waited to be told what it was. Rena brought reports like offerings, roots cut, names crossed out, money redirected with a surgeon's caution. The air tasted different when a rule stopped being a promise and started being a map. Men tested the edges. Of course they did. Power always nudges a fence to learn if it holds. A lieutenant with old scars and older habits tried to move girls through a back channel that should have died last night. The message reached us in a whisper that shook. Mateo listened without blinking, then sent 2 men to shut it, not with spectacle, not with fire. He dissolved it the way acid eats a chain, link by quiet link. When the offender was dragged to the courtyard, coughing excuses, he looked at me instead of him. I saw the plea. I saw the calculation. I saw the reflex that had kept this world thriving on soft throats. I didn't raise my voice. I stepped close enough for him to feel how unafraid I was, and said simply, "It ends." Mateo didn't need to threaten. He only moved his head a fraction, and the room remembered which way gravity falls now. No bodies, no message in blood, just a new order set like a bone. We spent hours at the table, charts reshaped, arrangements broken, a web retied with different silk. He deferred without looking weak and decided without looking hungry. An art that made men straighten their backs because the ground stopped tilting beneath them. When I flagged, he refilled my glass and didn't call it kindness. When he flagged, I touched the place where stitches pulled and didn't call it love. The sun dragged itself down the windows until the sea took it, and the house settled into the blue hour where everything true grows louder. On the terrace, Wynne lifted the edge of his shirt and found the heat under bandage. The horizon was a single dark seam. He stood with his hands on the railing like the ocean owed him an answer. I came to stand shoulder to shoulder with him, our shadows braided long on the stone. You were right to refuse fire, he said softly, as if speaking to the water. My men think fear is a song you have to keep singing or it forgets the words, then teach them a new one. I watched the last light die on the surface. Fear isn't music. It's noise. He breathed out. Noise kept me alive. It kept you alone. He turned then, the kind of turn that draws a line through a life. The wind moved his hair across his forehead. The evening made his eyes darker, a storm refusing to leave. I saw the monster there because I knew where to look, and I saw the man because he wasn't hiding from me anymore. He reached for my hand and stopped halfway, as if asking permission without humiliating either of us. I bridged the distance. I don't need you to change, I said, steady, each word laid like stone. I don't want the man you pretend to be in rooms where you think I'll break. I want the one who walked into a factory, willing to die to keep a war from touching me. I want the storm as it is, if you let me be the shoreline that shapes it. His fingers tightened, not crushing, anchoring. A muscle jumped along his jaw. You deserve a softer life than a man like me can make. I deserve a true one. I stepped closer, felt the heat of him replace the wind. You are not absolved. You are not forgiven. But you are mine, and I am yours. That's not a brand. It's a vow. My mouth barely moved, the truth traveling more through breath than sound. I love you. He flinched like the word struck, then steadied under them as if their weight fit him. He looked down, and for a suspended second I thought he would bow his head, not in shame, in reverence. His voice, when it came, was a rough thread. Say it again. I love you. I breathed into the small space where our mouths almost met, where heat decides to be flame. He didn't rush. He lifted my hand and pressed it over the place he had asked me to stitch shut, as if I'd stitched a gate and he was walking through it. When he kissed me, it wasn't a taking. It was a yes. His mouth was salt and promise, and I opened to it with the relief of someone who's been holding a door against a wind and finally lets it swing wide. He tasted of the day we had just altered, and all the nights we hadn't yet earned. He kissed me like a man who had never learned to ask and was teaching himself in real time with my breath as his language. When we broke, he stayed close, our foreheads touching, our hands still on his wound. I won't pretend gentleness I don't own, he said, but I will place everything I am where you can see it, and I will let you name the lines I never cross. Then hear me now. I traced the edge of bandage, felt the hammer of his pulse. No children, no civilians, no body turned into currency, no loyalty tax on innocence. We protect the places where we were once small. Done. His agreement sounded like a key turning. And you, what will you give me? My peace, I said, and the words didn't tremble. Not because you earned it, because I choose it, because it's the only thing that holds when the tide tries to take you from me. I slid my hand to his throat where power lives and pressed lightly until his breath hitched. Because you are the storm, and I am not here to quiet you. I am here to give you somewhere to break without destroying what we're building. His eyes closed for a single heartbeat. When they opened, the city's most dangerous man looked like a prayer answered by its own mouth. Then let me build, he whispered, and let me need you while I do. We stood there until night finished writing itself over the water. Behind us, the house rearranged its breathing to our rhythm. Somewhere, a phone rang and went unanswered. Somewhere, a man decided not to make the call he would have made yesterday. He lifted my hand to his lips and set the ring there with a kiss, not as a chain, as a circle. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, I echoed, and in the echo was a promise fierce enough to hold back the dark. Night held the house like a quiet hand. The rooms had stopped listening for war and begun listening for breath. Rena's footsteps faded, the last reports tucked under my palm, the keys heavy in my pocket like metal vowels learning how to say our names. I stood at the open window and let the salt come in, the curtains lifting and falling like a chest. Below, the sea worked the cliff with patience I envied. Above, the sky forgot how to storm and remembered how to hold stars. He came without announcing himself, but my body knew. The air shifted into him. He leaned against the frame across from me, bandage hidden under a black shirt, the wound a quiet drum beneath it. No suit jacket, no tie, no mask made for rooms that obey. Just the man I had asked to be seen. He didn't touch me. He let the moment find its balance, as if we were two bowls of water and neither should spill. Davy called, I said softly. He asked if you were, well, the pause lived between us for a breath. I told him yes. His mouth eased at the edges, almost a smile, almost a scar. Thank you. He wants to see me tomorrow. The shelter opens a new wing. He says the kids pick the paint colors and none of them match. That sounds like safety, he said. Ugly on the walls, right in the bones. We stood there, letting that be enough. I reached into my pocket and took out the keys. They chimed softly when they met my palm. He watched as I set them on the sill and pressed my fingers to them like a blessing. No fire, no spectacle, just the quiet ceremony of ownership given and received. I made a list, I whispered, the words a thread. People to call, places to fund, corners to light. It will be slow. I want it slow. Fast breaks things we can't mend. Slow, he agreed. We will live long enough to know the difference. I looked at his hands, at the lines that had once held violence like a second skin, and now held stillness with equal force. He stepped closer, not to take, but to offer the nearness. I slipped my fingers into his and turned his palm upward. With my other hand, I drew a line across his skin from wrist to thumb, then from lifeline to heart. A map, a promise, a boundary. Here, I said, tracing the path I wanted. You do not cross this when the noise rises. You will ask. You will wait. You will listen. He didn't argue. Name the rest. No lies in this room. No absence without a word. No deals that make children pay what men owe. Yes, and when fear tries to lead you, you find my hand and remember you're not alone. His throat moved. A rough swallow, a small undoing. He lifted my marked hand and kissed the center of my palm as if I had written scripture there. Heat climbed my arm like a tide choosing its shore. We did not rush the rest. We let quiet do its work. Dinner came and went untouched. Covered to keep warmth it no longer had. We walked the halls that used to echo with my careful steps and his careful silences. We stopped in the little room with the old piano. He sat, not to play, just to breathe where the music lived, and left the lid closed as if it were an animal sleeping. I rested my hip against the instrument and told him about the shelter's books, the way children whisper when they think paper can hear. He told me about a boat that would take us away for a week when the maps allowed it. No names, no guards, just air and water and the noise our bodies make when they remember rest. The island was only a word at that point, a shape on a horizon our minds could hold without breaking. Later, in the steel room, we packed away the last ledgers we meant to keep and the first we meant to kill, with ink, not flames. I wrote a name on a slip and slid it into an envelope that would never have a return address. He watched me seal it and breathed out as if the act had stitched him. Do you ever wish you could be smaller? I asked. Only if it meant I could belong to you in a way the world couldn't see, he said. But it doesn't. So I will be what I am and let you make it bearable. We returned to our room with the windows open to the sea. The wind had cooled. The curtains murmured. He undressed with care, the bandage dictating a gentleness that suited him more than his pride admitted. I moved closer and palmed the place I'd stitched, feeling the steady march beneath. He lowered his forehead to mine. We stood like that until time agreed to pass. When we slid beneath the sheets, it wasn't hunger that pulled us. It was recognition, the kind that moves without witness. Mouths finding the language they'd learned, breath sinking, the choreography of yes repeated without boredom. My hand guided him where pain stopped and wanting began. His hand cupped the back of my head like shelter. Nothing frantic, no proof demanded. He kissed the name he'd given me into the hollow beneath my ear, and I answered with the name he'd hidden from everyone but me, the one that made him human, the one that made him stay. After, he lay on his back and I sprawled across him with my ear to the place I had promised to guard. His heart kept time for us. The ring warmed against my skin. The future pressed its mouth to the edge of the bed and waited to be invited in. Tomorrow, he said, the words softer than any vow we'd spoken in rooms where men listen. Tomorrow, I echoed, and slid his notebook onto the nightstand with the key. Tonight we just breathe. We did. We breathed, in, out. The house matched us. The cliff held. The sea kept telling stone the same story it tells every night. Endure, and be changed. I fell into sleep with his hand splayed between my shoulder blades, a weight that steadied rather than pinned. If the dark came with old ghosts, they found no purchase. If doubt edged the bed, it watched and learned it had lost. Stay with me, I thought into the place where words become weather. Stay, and let morning find us exactly as we are, unforgiven, unafraid, unfinished, alive. The season turned without asking us, and the house learned how to breathe in the new weather. Mornings began with the sea drawing lines under the windows, and ended with ledgers that no longer smelled of smoke. Men came and went with shoulders that didn't creep to their ears as often. Rena's voice carried less iron when she read changes aloud. Roots retired, mouths fed, a circle drawn around schools and shelters so clean even the arrogant stepped back from it. Power quieted the way an animal does when it finally understands the hand near it won't strike. We kept the steel room but changed its temperature. The screens woke to maps rethreaded with softer colors. The red thinned to a warning rather than a habit. I sat at the long table and ran a finger along pins marking places we'd chosen to protect, the tip of my nail catching at their heads like a metronome. He stood opposite me, sleeves rolled, stitches of fading memory beneath his shirt, and waited for the word yes or the word no. Sometimes I didn't have either. Sometimes I walked to the window and watched the sea until my chest loosened, then said, "Try it another way." And he did. Davy visited on a Saturday that smelled like cut lemons and dusted books. He walked through the door taller than the last time, an easy smile hitching up his cheek even as his eyes scanned me for cracks, the habit of a boy who had learned that silence could hide storms. A girl with kind hands and chipped nail polish stood beside him, introducing herself with a voice that didn't shake. He called her Lucia, and looked at her the way boys do when they're learning what steadiness feels like. We ate on the terrace under a striped awning that flapped like a lazy flag. Davy talked with his hands, and when he forgot himself and laughed, it came up from someplace clean. He told me the new wing was open, that the children had chosen impossible colors for the walls and then refused to compromise, so the hallways looked like candy and loud dreams. He said the books were already warped from being held with damp fingers after washing. He said he'd started a workshop where kids could take apart old radios and put them back together wrong on purpose, just to learn that breaking isn't always an ending. Mateo stayed quiet, the way he does when he wants a moment to be owned by the people inside it. He watched my brother tell stories and didn't correct the parts that left him out. When Davy finally looked at him and said, "Thank you anyway, an adult's thank you, not a boy's debt," Mateo nodded once and lifted his glass in a gesture that meant, "Let's not name this more than it needs." Later, after they left with a bag of books and a loaf of bread that made the car smell like a bakery, I found him in the small room with the old piano. He had the lid open, fingers idling on the keys without pressing down. I sat beside him, the bench too narrow for distance, and leaned my shoulder into his. We didn't talk about my parents, but their absence was no longer a blade between us. It was an ache we were learning to hold together. He played a scale, then stopped halfway and set his hand atop mine where it rested on wood. The council fought us twice that month, once over money, a river they'd grown used to drinking blind, and once over a man who had hurt a girl and thought darkness would keep him safe. He didn't. I sent 2 people I trusted to walk her home every night for as long as she needed, and another 2 to dismantle the place that taught him that kind of confidence. The council complained about precedent. Mateo let them. He let them talk until the sound turned into a shape. Then he said, "This shape doesn't live here anymore," and slid the envelope with our new rules across the table. No one touched it until I placed my finger on the corner. After that, hands followed. The city shifted, slow and stubborn. A market that once closed early began to spray down its sidewalks at dusk like pride. A clinic painted its door a loud blue. A priest we didn't know sent a note that read, "You turned your face toward us, and we recognized you." There were threats, of course. There always are when you move a line someone mistook for a horizon. We answered with presence, not theater. Some nights he came to bed with the smell of rain and road on his skin, and I pressed my mouth to his shoulder until the cold left his bones. One evening, we took the car to a part of the city where the power lines looked like handwriting against a low sky. He kept his window down and his hand on my knee. People watched us the way people watch a story they've heard 100 different ways, and are waiting to see which one we choose. At a corner, an old woman selling oranges called me daughter and pressed 2 into my palm for luck. He paid for the rest and let her sneak bills into the apron pocket she pretended not to have. When we drove away, the car smelled like peel and sun. At home, the keys no longer felt cold. I wore them like jewelry when I needed courage, tucked them away when I needed quiet. His notebook gathered new pages, the handwriting looser where we had learned to breathe. Some nights he read to me what he'd written, small things like the weight of dawn on his chest, or the way my hair caught at his cuff when we passed each other in doorways. I answered with my own, tucked behind the elastic until we ran out of shyness. We planned an absence. Rena found an island where the map names sound mistranslated, and the air holds onto wind like a habit. "A week," she said, smiling in that rare way that takes 10 years off her eyes. "No staff. One cottage, a boat that doesn't ask questions. He looked at me like permission wasn't a thing he knew how to need. I said yes with the kind of certainty that resets a room. The night before we were to leave, we stood at the window and let the sea talk. The lights in the harbor blinked their slow code. He came up behind me and bracketed my hips, the gesture not claim but shelter. His mouth found the space below my ear and stayed there, breathing, the most patient kiss. I told him about a dream I'd had where the house was made of paper and the ocean came in and we didn't stop it. We floated our belongings down the hall and laughed. He said he dreamed of a crib. He said it like a question that trusted its answer. I turned in his arms and put my hand over the steady place his shirt hid. The empire would wait for a week. It had 2 hearts now, and one could take the beat, while the other went away to learn a different rhythm. He nodded into my palm. The window breathed salt into our hair. The future leaned against the frame and didn't knock, and I felt my body welcome it, simple as water finding a shore. The island smelled of salt and sun-warmed rope when the first pain reached around my spine and closed its hand. I was standing by the window, counting the whitecaps, when my breath stuttered and found a new rhythm that wasn't mine alone. Mateo was on the porch mending a stubborn hinge, sleeves rolled, the sea turning his hair wilder than the city ever dared. I said his name as if it were a lifeline. He was inside before the next breath. His eyes took everything in, the sheen on my skin, the way my hands braced against the table, the silence that isn't silence at all, but a body learning to open. Now? He asked, already moving. I nodded. He crossed to the radio, voice clipped and steady, coordinates spoken like orders that would not be disobeyed. A boat. A doctor. He said hurry, and the ocean said maybe. The cottage had been simple on purpose. Wood that remembered hands, linens that smelled of sun, a bowl for washing, matches in a blue tin. He lit the lamp though the room was bright, as if fire could help the light hold. When the next wave took me, I leaned into him, forehead to his shoulder, the beat of his pulse a metronome I could press my breath to. He asked where it hurt, and I told him with my hands. He put his palm to my lower back and held me together like he'd been born knowing how. The sea darkened by degrees, the horizon pulling a bruise over its face. Wind tested the shutters. The radio crackled with voices swallowed by distance. Between the surges, time thinned to threads. We folded towels, boiled water, laid a blanket where the floor felt most solid. He said the doctor was minutes out. The muscles inside me said minutes were a prayer the body doesn't answer. My waters broke in a bright, soundless shock, and heat ran down my thighs. He blinked once, not from fear, from awe, like a man watching his country rename itself. I laughed because the pain let me, a small sound that made him breathe again. He cleaned my legs with a towel, touch careful, reverent, hands that had held knives holding something gentler than mercy. Tell me what you need, he said. Name it. Stay where I can find you, I whispered. He did. He was gravity. The waves came closer, higher, not cruel, just insistent. I knelt as my body asked, hips heavy, palms flat on the blanket, forehead to the wood when I needed the earth. He knelt behind me and pressed where I guided, the weight of his hand a bridge between pain and purpose. We counted, not numbers, breaths, in through nose, out through mouth, the sound low and animal, not shameful, true. He matched me until our lungs agreed. A gust rattled the shutters. The rain arrived in a single curtain and then steadied, salt and fresh braided in the air. The world narrowed to sound and heat. My bones argued, then yielded. I felt him learning the grammar of it mid-sentence. Now, not yet. Again, almost. He spoke little, just my name in a cadence that let me climb the next wave. In the small valley between them, he kissed the back of my shoulder, mouth open, breath warm, a benediction without words. Then the shift, the pressure dropping from sky to earth, the ache changing its accent. He's coming, I said, and the way I said it turned a dangerous man into a door. He moved to the end of the blanket, palms open, knees braced, breath deep and quiet as if quiet could teach the storm its manners. I've got you, he said, and the room believed him. The burn was bright and exact, a ring of heat I wanted to flee and entered anyway. I bore down, throat open, the sound of it not a scream but a vow. He saw hair. He said it like light. I reached back and felt the slick crown, the universe under my fingers, the shock of it holy and crude at once. Now, he told me, voice steady, and I went where my body pointed. He caught the head with hands that didn't shake, and the next breath brought shoulders, and then the whole weight of our sun slid into his palms as if gravity had been invented for this moment. There was a silence before the cry, a silence that lasted the width of one heartbeat and my entire life. Then he opened his mouth to the world, and the sound cut me clean and stitched me shut in the same instant. Mateo made a sound I had never heard from him and will never forget, half laugh, half prayer, the human sound of a man finding a name he didn't know he'd been missing. He laid our son on my chest, the heat of him shocking, the slick velvet of new skin against mine, his legs kicking at the air he'd just met like he had opinions already. We waited there, the three of us, breathing in a triangle. Mateo's hands were everywhere and nowhere. My hair, the baby's shoulder, my face. He tied the cord with a strip of clean cloth and cut it with the small knife he'd used on 100 darker nights, turning it into something that separated without violence. He pulled a warm towel over the boy and tucked the edges like weather tucking a seed. And then it happened. The thing I'll keep even when everything else fades. It started in his eyes, a shine he would have turned to steel if the world had been watching. No one was. Not the city, not the men, not the old gods he never prayed to. Just us. The shine broke and a single tear found the line of his cheekbone. It traveled careful as though learning his face. It paused at the corner of his mouth, then fell. A single tear from the man the world calls cruel, landing on our son's blanket like a blessing he didn't ask permission to give. The door opened on a rush of night air, and a man in a raincoat stood there, doctor's bag dark with weather, hair pasted to his forehead. He took one look and smiled in that way healers do when they arrive just after the miracle. "Late," he said, gentle, setting the bag down, checking what needed checking with hands that knew. "Perfect," he added, and I believed him. We fed him, our boy, his mouth rooting, finding, latching with a determination that made my whole body lightheaded. The doctor murmured something about strong lungs. Mateo stood behind me on the bed and wrapped his arms around us both, chin on my shoulder, breath warm, making a shelter of himself. The lamp burned low. The rain softened. The sea kept time against the rocks like a drummer with patience. When the doctor left, promising to return at dawn, Mateo reached for the radio and then stopped. "Davi," I said. He nodded. The screen lit our faces in soft blue. My brother answered in 2 rings, hair a mess, eyes rimmed with sleep that fled the second he heard the sound in the room with us. "Is that?" he asked, and then our son cried, a clear ribbon of sound the camera didn't deserve. Davy's mouth crumpled and he pressed 2 fingers to his eyes, laughing the way grief laughs when it's being forgiven a little. "Hey, little man," he whispered. "Welcome." The call turned into a blur of love that didn't need better reception. When the cottage was quiet again, I looked down at the weight of him on my chest, the perfect chaos of his face, the tiny fist opening and closing as if practicing the world. Mateo traced one bright curl with a fingertip and then looked at me, the question in his eyes not about power, not about penance, about sleep and water and whether I hurt and whether he could make it less. I lifted my hand and touched his cheek where the salt had dried. "You did well," I said, voice worn thin with joy. "You brought him to me." "No," he whispered, kissing the crown of our son's head, then my forehead, his mouth shaking only once. "You brought him through." Outside, the rain finished, teaching the roof a lesson it already knew. Inside, our son dreamed his first small dreams. Mateo lay down beside us and slipped a hand under the baby's back so his palm held 2 heartbeats. I closed my eyes. The island breathed. The tide came in. The world, for one whole night, chose not to ask for anything but this. Thank you for walking with me to the very last line. Your presence here means more than you can imagine. When you tap like, leave a few words, or share a video, YouTube learns that this story deserves to travel farther, and that simple ripple keeps me writing with soul and devotion. If these stories feel like home to you, leave a like, write a small comment, even a gentle "I'm here" warms my heart, and if you haven't yet, subscribe. It's free. You can turn on notifications to meet each new chapter as it arrives, and if it isn't too much to ask, share it. On your socials, on WhatsApp, with a friend who might need something beautiful today. Your help truly makes a difference. Let's scatter love stories across a world crowded with noise and ache. Perhaps with one small gesture we can make it better, even just a little. Thank you for being here, and may you always, always feel welcome.